Derrida saw Western thought as structured on binaries, in which one term is seen as privileged over the other: man, woman, speech, writing, essence, appearance, absence, presence. Derrida believed that these binaries are arbitrary, but philosophers, in constructing philosophical systems, elevate them into eternal and absolute categories. His famous concept of deconstruction, among other things, is a way of showing how certain generally accepted binaries are arbitrary and unstable. Let's take, for instance, the binary between man and nature. In modern thought, specifically in science and technological development, man is seen as conquering nature, as making it submit to the needs of humanity. Nature is seen as passive, lacking autonomy, there to be explored. Man is seen as active, as autonomous, as an explorer. Therefore, man is often seen as the privileged side of the binary. However, if we take a more careful look at this binary, we see that it is not as stable as often assumed. Although humans are seen as conquering nature, they also depend on it. In fact, nature is the precondition for the possibility of the existence of humans. And when we think of the possible environmental catastrophes that climate change might cause in the future, we see how we are sometimes not only dependent on nature, but also victims of it. Secondly, there are so-called undecidables, examples that cannot neatly fit into either side of the binary. If animals are a part of nature, where do we mark the point in the evolution from chimpanzee to human at which man becomes separate from nature? The distinction starts seeming arbitrary and flexible. We start seeing how the binary undermines itself, because for it to exist, nature must be distinguished from humanity, yet humanity can only exist in constant connection with nature. This is an example of how a binary might begin to be deconstructed. In Sonic Adventure 2, certain binaries are explicit. Already in the menu, we see how the story mode of the game is split into two, Hero and Dark. But more interestingly, two of the main characters form an important binary, Sonic the Hedgehog and Shadow the Hedgehog. This binary subsumes several other binaries, Light and Dark, Good and Evil, and since Shadow was created in a lab, Natural and Artificial. There is, however, one binary I want to focus on in detail. The French thinker Baudrillard, drawing from Derrida's concept of binaries, focused on one specific binary, the binary between life and death. In our society, life is the privileged side of the life-death binary. Death is seen as merely the absence of life. However, Baudrillard claimed this binary is not universal as is typically assumed. He gives examples of tribal societies in which the life-death binary was crossed, in which spirits and ghosts were said to live among the dead, in which communication with the no longer living was possible, in which there were rituals seen as simultaneous deaths and rebirths. Even in the West, in the Middle Ages, there was the dance of death, a genre of art in which death was personified as interacting with the world of the living. For Baudrillard, this binary is also the origin of different types of authority, because when people are obsessed with keeping life and death separated, they submit to political authorities that promise the postponement of death in this life, or religious authorities that promise the continuation of life after death. We become so obsessed with keeping these two poles of the binary apart that we ironically become obsessed with death, and because of this, Baudrillard even termed our societies death societies. So how does the life-death binary play out in Sonic Adventure 2? Very importantly, Shadow is immortal, and so the Sonic Shadow binary creates another binary, that of mortality and immortality, life and death. Or perhaps, is it the life-death binary that creates the Sonic Shadow binary? 50 years before the events of Sonic Adventure 2, Professor Gerald Robotnik was running Project Shadow on the space colony Ark. Project Shadow was a government-sanctioned initiative to create an immortal life form, which Robotnik only agreed to partake in because he hoped that the results might help to save his granddaughter Maria from NIDS, the Sonic version of AIDS. Unable to make progress, Robotnik secretly contacted the Black Arms Race, an alien civilization whose leader Black Doom offered to assist Gerald in the project. In exchange for the Chaos Emeralds, Black Doom gave the professor a sample of his blood, which ended up being the key to the ultimate life form. Despite knowing that the intentions of the Black Arms were undesirable, he collaborated with them and ended up creating Shadow the Hedgehog. Once Shadow was created, he befriended Robotnik's daughter Maria, developing a close friendship with her. Meanwhile, information on Gerald's connections with the Black Arms leaked to the GUN, a worldwide military and law enforcement organization who decided to launch an invasion to stop the work being done on the colony. When GUN troops descended on Ark, they went after the bio-lizard, who they mistakenly thought was the ultimate life form they were looking for. Trying to put the bio-lizard into stasis, they lost numerous soldiers. From there, they went on doing damage control, shutting everything down, getting everyone off Ark, and killing those who resisted. Maria convinced Shadow to escape the GUN forces through an escape pod. Her last wish was for the people on the planet to get the chance at happiness. As she wished him goodbye, GUN soldiers stormed into the lab and killed Maria, which Shadow could do nothing about as his escape pod left the colony. Let's look at the structure of this event. The Doctor's motivation for creating an immortal life form was not Maria's death as such, but the thought of it, the expectation of Maria's death before it actually occurred. And so, since death is someone's absence, his motivation was Maria's absent absence, a death that has not yet occurred. The process of creating this immortal life form, instead of preventing Maria's death, led to Maria's death, but a homicidal death, not the death by disease expected by Robotnik. The expected death by disease never occurred, and the strange result is that Maria's death was caused by the thought of a death that never in fact happened, an anticipation of an absent absence that never became present, and yet clearly it was present in its effects on the world. This is an example of why Derrida often talked about haunting, about ghosts and specters. Our perceptions, our ideas, and our actions are haunted by such apparitions. Entities in between being and non-being, imagined absences, non-existent objects, and events that will never occur. As Mark Fisher said when talking about Derrida's concept of ontology, haunting is the state proper to being as such. Dr. Robotnik was haunted by the idea of Maria dying by disease. This death by disease never occurred, and forever remained a ghost. Robotnik's act here, his irresponsible contract with the Black Arms to save Maria, strikingly shows the irresponsibility that Derrida saw as constituting ethics as such. Another example of a binary, the binary of responsibility and irresponsibility undermining itself. In ethical decisions, there is always a tension between what Derrida called general responsibility and absolute responsibility. General responsibility is responsibility to your fellow beings, your community, and humanity as a whole. The kind of responsibility that is repeatable, common, and describable in certain principles. Absolute responsibility, however, is a responsibility to a specific someone, the so-called other. In this case, Robotnik delves into absolute responsibility to his daughter Maria, a type of responsibility that cannot be repeated or explained by ethical principles. He does this at the cost of the general responsibility he had towards his community and political environment. Like Abraham of the Bible delving into absolute responsibility towards God and rejecting his responsibilities towards his family, Robotnik exemplifies that absolute ethical responsibility that cannot be calculated or transcribed into principles. Baudrillard's thesis that political authority grows out of the life-death binary is here affirmed, because that's the origin of both Robotnik's submission to the Black Arms and the attack of GUN forces. We see how Shadow, emerging from the life-death binary, also shows its instability, because not only is it Robotnik's fear of Maria's death that leads to Shadow's creation, it is also Maria's death that gives Shadow's life purpose. Towards the ending of the game, the binaries grow unstable. The good-evil binary loses balance as Shadow ends up teaming up with Sonic, realizing that Maria's last wish was to save humanity. The light-dark binary topples as Sonic and Shadow, through the power of the Chaos Emeralds, achieve their super states and both adopt a light color scheme. We see how, although the game is divided into hero and dark, the goals of the game's heroes could not be achieved without the cast of the dark characters. Finally, after helping Sonic defeat the final hazard, Shadow is drained of his energy, he falls to the earth, and despite never losing his immortality, is presumed dead. Until his next appearance in Sonic Heroes, Shadow is left in that state between being and non-being, inside the trace within the life-death binary. The point of deconstruction is not just the trivial fact that one pole needs its opposite to be made sense of. The point is that the binary undermines itself and has within itself the germ of its own disintegration. The point is also not to escape binaries because they are a fundamental part of our thinking. The point is to see that binaries can be reconstructed, rearranged, placed into new and perhaps better systems. This is what Sonic Adventure 2 does, and seen from this aspect, it is an emphatically deconstructive game.